Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're stepping way back in time, more than 15 centuries ago actually, right into the sweeping, harsh deserts of pre-Islamic northern Arabia. Think of this as a documentary-style deep dive into a man whose very name literally became synonymous with loyalty. We're going to unpack an ancient Arabian legend that has absolutely captivated poets, kings, and scholars for generations.
I want you to really think about this for a second. What would you sacrifice to keep your word? Would you give up your entire fortune? Your kingdom? What about your own son? Now, for most of us, that's just an unimaginable moral dilemma. But for one particular nobleman, this wasn't some hypothetical philosophy debate. It was a terrifying, real-life nightmare. And his answer to that question established the incredibly high stakes of a story that would echo through history. In fact, his unimaginable sacrifice inspired an enduring proverb, more faithful than Al-Samaw'al, or as it said in Arabic, Alpha min al-Samawal. For over 1,000 years, across entirely different empires and generations, this saying has been the absolute gold standard for integrity. The man behind that proverb was Al-Samaw'al ibn Adiya, and today we're diving straight into the history, the myth, and the truly staggering legacy of his life.
All right, let's start with part one, the Fortress of Al-Ablaq. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand this man, we first need to understand his world, right? We're talking about pre-Islamic Arabia. This was a time and place where tribal alliances, mutual protection, and securing your trade routes literally meant the difference between life and death. And right in the middle of this was the legendary Al-Ablaq Palace in Tabra, up in the northwestern reaches of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, this wasn't just a house. Built by Al-Samaw'al's grandfather, Adiya, this place was an impregnable stronghold rising straight out of the desert, totally dominating the vital trade routes that connected Arabia to the Levant.
Al-Ablaq was an absolute marvel. The name itself actually means the piebald, which refers to its striking design. It was built using these alternating red and white stones. But look, its true power wasn't just in those massive walls. It had a freshwater well inside, which, in the harsh desert, made it a vital sanctuary for life and commerce. Arabs from all over the region would flock to the bustling market set up right near its gates. People called it Al-Fard, the unique, because local lore held that it was completely unconquerable by local raiders.
Moving on to part two, a poet of two worlds. What's fascinating about Al-Samaw'al is how he beautifully straddled two very distinct cultural identities. On the one hand, he had this proud Jewish heritage. He traced his lineage back to prominent Jewish Arabian tribes, and some traditions even link him directly to the biblical Aaron. His faith profoundly shaped his moral teachings. But then, on the other hand, he was the quintessential Arab nobleman. People often called him the King of Taima. His mother was actually from the royal Arab tribe of Ghassan. So he really embodied those classical desert virtues. We're talking immense hospitality, fierce pride, and unyielding valor. This dual identity earned him massive respect across a really fractured tribal landscape. But he wasn't just a wealthy guy with a big fortress. Al-Samaw'al was a highly celebrated poet, mostly known for his famous Lamia poem. His verses were so respected that years later, the great compiler Abu Tamam included them in the Hamasa. If you don't know the Hamasa, it's basically the most trusted classical anthology of earlier Arabic verse. And his poetry didn't just brag about military power. It captured a deeply virtuous worldview that was entirely centered around loyalty and honor. Just listen to the opening lines of that exact poem, which perfectly reveal his core philosophy. He wrote, "If a man's honor is not defiled by wickedness, then any garment he may wear is beautiful." Let that breathe for a second. To Al-Samaw'al, true wealth wasn't gold. It wasn't weapons or even an unconquerable fortress. True wealth was untarnished honor. And, as we're about to see, the universe was going to put that exact philosophy to the absolute ultimate test.
Which brings us to part three, the ultimate test of honor.
Okay, so here is where a terrible trap closes in on Al-Samaw'al. It all started when Imru al-Qays, who was this famous warrior poet and deposed prince, came seeking refuge at Al-Ablaq. Before heading off to try and get military aid from the Byzantine emperor, he left his daughter, his precious weapons, and 5 highly coveted suits of mail under Al-Samaw'al's protection. But of course, word gets out. A hostile army, led by a rival commander, marches on Al-Ablaq and lays siege to the fortress, trying to seize that treasure. Now, they couldn't breach the walls. But tragically, Al-Samaw'al's young adolescent son, who had been out hunting, came back during the siege and was captured right outside the gates. The enemy commander drags the boy up to the walls and issues a brutal ultimatum:
hand over the armor or watch your son die. And this brilliantly illustrates the horrific scene. Mentally picture the father, standing up there, looking down from these massive, unyielding stone walls at his captive son down below, totally surrounded by a hostile army. I mean, it is the ultimate standoff. On one side, you have his own flesh and blood, and on the other, his word, his solemn promise to a guest who trusted him implicitly. Faced with this agonizing, unimaginable decision, Al-Samaw'al delivered his response with chilling resolve. He said, "Do whatever you wish with him. I would not betray my Dimma, nor surrender my protege." He explained to the commander that while a son could be replaced by brothers, honor, once lost, could literally never be recovered. He chose his solemn word over his own blood, and the terrible consequence followed. The son was executed right there, struck in twain by the enemy commander right before his father's eyes. Yet, the great doors of Al-Ablaq remained firmly shut. The trust remained unbroken. And eventually, realizing they were never, ever going to break a spirit of that magnitude, the enemy just packed up and retreated into the desert. Al-Samaw'al had paid the absolute ultimate price, but he had kept his word. Let's shift gears for part 4, separating history from myth. Now, when we analyze a legend like this, we've got to put our historian hats on and discern fact from embellishment. We know for a fact that the man existed. You can literally go see the archaeological ruins of the Al-Ablaq fortress in the Taima region of Saudi Arabia today. And his magnificent poetry undeniably survives in those classical anthologies we talked about. However, when it comes to the oral tradition, modern scholars do debate things like the highly specific dialogue of the siege, or whether the dramatic execution of the son was a literal historical event, or maybe more of a symbolic myth used to convey the idea of absolute loyalty. We're not here to declare the oral tradition as cold hard fact, but we absolutely have to recognize it as the foundation of his immense cultural impact. Because whether that siege happened exactly as it was described, or if it was embellished over the centuries, the narrative perfectly encapsulates a really crucial concept, the ma. In ancient Arabian society, taking someone under your protection wasn't just a casual favor, like watching someone's dog. It was a sacred, binding contract. To break it was to invite eternal shame upon your entire lineage. So Al-Samaw'al's story essentially became the ultimate teaching tool for this vital moral responsibility. Which leads us nicely to part 5, a timeless, shared legacy. His legacy managed to do something incredibly rare. It unified entirely different cultures. He became the universal Arab symbol of loyalty. Later, poetic giants like Al-Asha wrote verses explicitly praising his sacrifice, urging others to, be like Al-Samaw'al. And what's truly beautiful here is that he's held as a hero across Arab, Jewish, and later Islamic historical traditions. His story completely transcends religious and political boundaries. It stands purely as a universal human moral, a lasting testament to the lengths a person might go to preserve their integrity. Because, well, physical walls eventually crumble, right? Over the last 15 centuries, vast empires disappeared. Mighty kings turned to dust. Even the literal massive stones of Al-Ablaq fell into ruin. But the name, Al-Samaw'al, that remained immortalized. He wasn't remembered for his wealth or his stone walls, but for his unbreakable honor. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. But I want to leave you with a final thought to really reflect on. Empires disappear, but honor remains immortal. Think about the promises you make in your own life. What is the real weight of your word? Ultimately, when everything else fades away, what is your greatest monument? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.